Hello, everyone. This is Rose. Today's topic from the Book of Life is the Book of Daniel, Part 1. Daniel, a man of faith and purpose, one who walked in faith and lived in truth. Let's take a look at this short story from the Book of Life. The king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Once again, the children of Israel were in captivity. Once Israel was under captivity, the Babylon king sent his eunuchs, his officers, to bring him certain children of Israel. This king requests children that was without blemish, well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding in science. The king wants these children to be leadership quality with the ability to learn and teach the occult arts and language of the Chaldeans, the Semitic people. The interesting thing about the Babylonian king request, he is not choosing children of his own culture who already know the language. Instead, he is selecting the best children from another culture, from Israel, to learn and teach the language and their occult ways. It makes one wonder. Is this a strategy to convert Israel to their beliefs as they dominate and rule over them? Interesting. The Babylonian king wanted the selected children of Israel to eat of his provision for 3 years. Their meal was to consist of the king's meat and wine daily. The head eunuch changed the names of the selected children of Israel. So the kids that they chosen that fit the description that the king gave, they changed their name, giving them names that blend with the Babylonian culture. David did not want to defile himself by eating the meal selected by the king. Now, why the king made a decision to feed these kids his meat of choice and wine in order for the next 3 years as they learn and train. For some reason, he thought this would be the perfect meal to help them with their growth and their development and so forth. But David did not want to defile his body because that was not a diet that he was used to. He wanted to honor his body and respect his God in a different way. He expresses to this head eunuch officer that he did not want to eat of the king's meal. And he expressed to the king, this officer, what type of meal he chooses. But the officer was very fearful. He was fearful of being beheaded if the countenance of the children who did not eat of the king's meal was not well. See, because he felt if you do not eat it and you do not look well, then the king will behead me. I am held accountable. But Daniel convinced the head officer assigned to him and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He convinced the officer that was assigned to them to allow them to not eat of the king's meal for just 10 days. Daniel said, just try it for 10 days. Then compare us compare us to the ones who ate of the king's meal. So Daniel was using wisdom. After all, this king did have his officer select the best children, the ones who were skillful in wisdom, well favored, cunning in knowledge, understanding in science. So Daniel had a way of talking to people and using wisdom in order to convince them into giving him his decision a try. And this king did. He was able to convince the king. He requested the officers was to give them a diet consisting of posts, which is a plant base such as vegetables and lentil. So at the end of the 10 days, the 4 children of Israel, which is Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These 4 children of Israel, their countenance appeared fairer. They was fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which ate of the king's meal. So God had given all 4 of these children who did not eat of the king's meal knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, because they was obedient not to defile their body and to be in obedience to their God. And because they used wisdom and they persuaded the officer in their obedience, God gave them favor. And he gave them favor. He gave them knowledge and skills in all learning and wisdom. However, Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams in addition to the knowledge, the skills and the knowledge and all learning. Now, these children of Israelite was to be trained for 3 years. At the end of the 3 years assignment, the Babylonian king communed with all the children selected. Among them, all he found none like Daniel. Out of all the children, he found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He found none like them because the favor of God was with them, because they chose not to defile their bodies. They were in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the musicians, astrologers that was in all his kingdom. The Babylonian king dreamed dreams in his 2nd year reign in Jerusalem over the Israelites. These dreams broke his sleep and troubled his spirit. The king sent a command to call for the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to come interpret his dreams. After providing an interpretation twice, they gave the king an interpretation, and the first interpretation, the king was upset because the thing they had interpreted had already passed. So he gave them another opportunity. So they gave a second interpretation. And there again, the king was angry because the interpretation they gave had already passed. So now the king was very angry with the Chaldeans. The king tells the Chaldeans there is one decree for them in preparing lying and corrupt words which they spoke to him. The Chaldeans had to think fast because they knew the decree would not be in their favor. So they tell the king that there is not a man upon the earth who can serve the king in the manner which he requests. And for this reason, no other king, lord, or ruler have ever asked such a thing as of any musician, astrologer, or Chaldean. So they're basically letting the king know that you asking something of us that no one ever asked of us, because they know that this is beyond our ability. No other king had ever done this. So he's trying to talk this king out of giving a decree that he knows is going to be not beneficial to them. They further informed the king, or the Chaldean further informed the king, that what he was asking of them is a rare thing, and there is none who can answer except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. Now he put that like that to the king because the Babylonian kings do not serve a God that is without flesh. So he's letting him know your request is rare, is beyond our ability. We serve statues. We don't serve a God that is without flesh. So even this Chaldean had knowledge of God and knew of his ability to do the impossible in order for him to make that statement to the king. Now, one would think this answer would satisfy the king, but no, it did not. In fact, the king became more angry. The king sent forth the decree to kill all wise men. He was so angry, he wanted all wise men put to death because not one can help him interpret his dream. Now the thing is, we have to keep in mind that the children of Israel are in a 3-year training to be wise men, to know, to be in leadership, to know the wisdom, and to be able to do exactly as the musicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, all of that, know their occult, know their language. They're in training to know this. So they are among the wise people. So after the officers were preparing to kill Daniel and his 3 friends, so why they was chosen, and the Bible did not speak about the Babylonian wise men being killed, but it goes to say as the officers were preparing to kill Daniel and his 3 friends, Daniel spoke with wisdom to the head officer. Because see, Daniel was good. He was a good speaker. And he knew how to capture the ear of people and persuade them. So he spoke to the head officer. And he asked the head officer, why is the king's decree so hasty? Why is it so hasty? When the head officer tells Daniel about the wise men not being able to interpret the king's dream, Daniel asked to be given time with the king to interpret his dream. Because see, what they brought in the Babylonian wise men to interpret the king's dream, not the Israels who was in training, but yet and still, it appears as though that's who they was going to kill first. So Daniel said, well, give me time with the king to interpret his dream. While Daniel was waiting for a reply to be given time with the king, he informed his 3 friends of the king's decree. He informed Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the king's decree. Then Daniel began to pray to God for mercy for him and his 3 friends, and for the interpretation of the king's dream. The interpretation of the king's dream was revealed to Daniel in a vision. After receiving the night vision, Daniel blessed and praised the God of heaven. As a little sidebar, how many of us remember to simply say thank you to God for his daily blessings? I like the way Daniel went back after praying for God to give him the vision. And then he praised God once he received it. Once he received the interpretation, he went back and he praised God and he thanked him. So that's something that we all must do. It was just a little food for thought. Okay, back to Daniel. After giving God praise, Daniel was ready to go see the king. He asked the head officer to take him to the king. Here's the thing. The head officer changed Daniel's title when he presented him to the king. Because you remember, they gave all the children of Israel Babylonian names. Because that they was part of the wise group in training. But the officer, he didn't introduce Daniel with his Babylonian name. He introduced Daniel as one of the captives of Judah, not as one of the children of Israel that we trained for 3 years to become one of our wise men. I believe the officer introduced Daniel as a captive of Judah because the king had ordered all wise men to be killed. So now you bringing me a wise man and you supposed to kill them all? So Daniel, using wisdom, as he spoke to the king, he tells the king, the interpretation you demand from the wise men, astrologers, the musicians, and the soothsayers cannot be revealed by them. But there is a God in heaven that has the answer. The God in heaven has given to me the answer to your dream. It is not because of any wisdom that I may have. He let him know, don't look to me as being something special to interpret dreams. I can only do this through the God in heaven. So he tells him, it is not because of any wisdom that I may have. It was given so that you might know the thoughts of your heart. After hearing the interpretation of the dream, the king fell on his knees upon his face and he worshiped Daniel. Something that Daniel really did not want him to do, but after all, they're but Babylonians. They worship other things other than the God in heaven. The king declared to Daniel, of the truth it is. So the king believed Daniel. He tells him, of the truth it is, that your God is a God of gods. Okay, now he's hearing Daniel. He understanding. He listened to the words Daniel said, that it is not of my doing. It is from the God of heaven that gives this to me. So now he tells him that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets. So now he's acknowledging Daniel's God, the God in heaven. The king made Daniel a great man. He gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all wise men of Babylon. Daniel requests that the king allow Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. In recapping, once again, the children of Israel are in captivity by the Babylonians besieging them in Jerusalem. Within 3 years of being in captivity, the favor of God is with Israel by way of Daniel and his 3 friends, who were promoted to become rulers over some Babylonian affairs. After Daniel requests that the king allow Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be over the affairs of the province of Babylon, the Babylonian king made a gold statue. The king sends for all his leaders to come to the dedication of the golden statue. The leaders were told to command all people to fall down and worship the golden statue when they hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, and other musical instruments. The leaders are to inform the people anyone who doesn't fall down and worship the golden image will be cast into a fiery, burning furnace. Daniel and his 3 friends were also leaders with the other Babylonian leaders. They were among them. But Daniel and his 3 friends did not obey the command of the king. They did not. But you have those spies that are watching, trying to report back to the king, who does not obey. So some of the Chaldeans noticed that Daniel and his 3 friends was not obeying the command of the Babylonian king. These Chaldeans reported to the king that the Jews he set over the affairs of the province Babylon has not obeyed his command nor worshiped the golden image. The king became angry after hearing the report from the Chaldeans. He ordered for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought to him. The king asked them if the report he heard was true. He tells them if it is true, they will be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king by saying, "We will not serve your God, nor worship the golden image which you have made. Our God, who we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace." The king was angry, beyond angry, with their boldness. He was so angry, he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter. Then he ordered for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be cast into the heated furnace. Let me tell you, that furnace was so hot, the officers who cast the 3 leaders into the furnace, as they got near the furnace to just throw those 3 leaders into the furnace, they were killed by the heat. The heat of the furnace killed the officers who cast Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace. Isn't that the thought of that is just beyond imagination. It's like these 3 was put in the fire. They was not killed. They was put in it, but the officers who cast them into the fire was killed from the heat. Now, as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was cast into the furnace, they was in there and they fell down on their knees, trusting in their God to deliver them. They were in the furnace, in the fire. You understand? In this heated furnace that was heated 7 times hotter than normal. And you can see how hot this furnace was in order for us to kill the officers who was standing outside the furnace, casting them in. But yet they go in there and they get down on their knees and they begin to trust in the God, their God in heaven, to deliver them. The king asked his officers, "Did you not put 3 men in the furnace?" "Yes," replied the officers. The king then states, "I see 4 men walking around in the midst of the fire." 4 men walking in fire. "And they have no hurt," states the king. And the king goes on to say, "And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Now we know flesh and blood did not reveal that to him, or any of his golden images that he worshiped did not reveal that to him. See, his understanding was opened up about God when Daniel gave acknowledgement to it was his God who gave the interpretation of his dream. And that's when the king began to believe in the God in heaven. So now his understanding was opened up. And he said the Spirit of God had to give this to him. Because trust and believe, no flesh and blood revealed this information to him when he said the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The king goes near the furnace and he tells Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that they are servants of the Most High God. So you know when he went near the furnace, it was during the time it had calmed down. The heat had dissipated some. It wasn't as hot, 7 times as hot as it had been. Because he was standing from afar when he was observing them walking around in that fire. But now that it has come, the flames and the heat has died down, he goes near the furnace and he tells the 3 that was cast into the furnace. He tells them that they are servants of the Most High God. All the leaders of Babylon witnessed the fire had no power on the 3 Israelites. It had no power on their bodies, their hair, their clothes, nor did the 3 men smell like fire or smoke. The king blessed the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. See, the thing is, he was introduced to their God through Daniel, through the interpretation of the dream. But now, after what he just witnessed, oh, trust and believe, he was all in now. The king blessed the God in heaven of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who delivered his servants that trust in him and who has changed the words of the king. The Babylonian king ordered that the three that was put into the furnace no longer had to serve any god other than their own God. The king made a decree that anyone who speak against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces. Now this is King Nebuchadnezzar that we're speaking of. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. He gave them a promotion. The thing about this story, and I hate to call it a story because it is really a history. It is history. We learn from this time in history. This is real time in history. This is something that is not a made-up story. This is real time in history. These 3 was cast into a fire, and God did what we all read about in the Bible. He did the impossible. These three executing faith and trust in God, because of their faith and trust in God, it made the impossible possible. The impossible was possible. God's word declared in Mark chapter 9 verse 23, all things are possible to him that believe. He did not say some things. He said all things. We read in this history, and that's what I'm going to call it, not a story. We read in this history of time that the impossible was made possible because these three have faith, they trust in God, they believe. They believed. This is the end of part 1 of the book of Daniel. Click the thumbs up and the subscribe button. Be blessed and safe, people. And remember to click that thumbs up button.